And good evening. We're doing it live right here, weeknights in the 5 o'clock hour in Los Angeles. Mottek on Money, 5 nights a week for you, live on the air here in 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com and the on-demand Mottek on Money podcast for you at kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, all your favorite podcast platforms. Well, the Fed holds the line on short-term interest rates today. Big announcement from the Federal Reserve in a full-blown news conference from Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. The Fed leaving its benchmark interest rates unchanged today, but signaled another rise is possible in November to slow the economy down even more and deal with inflation, which is still running hot. The Dow came in for a closing loss of 42 points. Make that 77 points lower. The S&P 500 down 42. The NASDAQ finished down 209 points. Stocks moved lower after the Fed policymakers kept their policy interest rate unchanged as expected, while indicating most of the Federal Open Market Committee continue to expect one more quarter percentage point interest rate hike before the end of the year. And where things go from there remains to be seen. The Fed also sending a clear message that interest rates are expected to be higher for longer by cutting their forecast for rate cuts in 2024 from 4 to 2. The Fed also predicted the economy will slow from an estimated 2.1% growth rate this year to 1.5% next year and then speed up again. It's predicted the rate of inflation would decelerate from an estimated 3.3% at the end of this year to 2.5% by next year and 2.2% in 2025 based on the Fed's preferred price gauge. Taking a look at what else happened today, the Fed chairman, after the announcement, said he always thought a soft landing was a plausible outcome in his words. He held a news conference after the Fed announcement, after the Fed kept rates unchanged at a 22-year high, by the way, but also signaled rates could stay higher for longer than had been anticipated. Powell said he was monitoring rising real rates and that ultimately factors that are outside of our control could determine the fate of the economy. This is why we are in a position to move carefully. One of the definitions of economist is someone who has a unshakable grasp of the obvious, and that sounds like this definition applies here today. The price of oil, of course, which has been popping to highs of the year, pulled back a bit today, down 92 cents in New York to $90.28 a barrel. Brent crude in London, the international benchmark, down 81 cents at $93.54 a barrel. The damage has been done at Southern California gas pumps, where inflation continues to be on full display. In case you hadn't noticed, take a look. The average price for regular gas in Los Angeles, $6.07. Now the average price for regular gas in L.A., this according to the AAA fuel gauge survey out today, premium now averaging $6.37 a gallon. So if you're lucky to get that, that's the average price. A lot of stations charging even more than that. Diesel, by the way, now at $6.48 a gallon. Oops, they did it again. The California Senate has passed new legislation to make it easier to impose taxes and hard to repeal them. I'll discuss that tonight with tax watchdog Susan SHELLY, columnist for the Southern California News Group and host of the Howard Jarvis radio show, heard Monday nights right here on 790 KBC. And can you believe it? Los Angeles getting national attention again, this time for a new L.A. homeless measure, which the L.A. City Council has approved putting on the ballot early next year, which, if approved, would place homeless people in hotel rooms next to paying guests. Yep, you heard me. I'll discuss that this evening with Chip Rogers, the president of the American Hotel and Lodging Association. But first, on your money, the markets, the economy, inflation, and today's big Fed decision and the whole works. Joining us live now, Ken Winans, money manager, president of Winans Investments at winansinvestments.com, Forbes magazine contributor, market historian, and author of Investment Atlas 1 and 2. Ken Winans, thank you very much for taking the call on this big day today. And I know you were hanging on every word the Fed chairman said today at his news conference, and I've read the statement carefully. Give us your assessment of things here at the moment.
Frank, the number one thing I saw is when the market went off a cliff, which it literally did in the last half hour of trading, the epiphany hit everybody that inflation is going to run its usual historical cycle, which is 6 to 8 years. And if you go back and look at this, started back in COVID, back in 2020. Here we go going forward. It is a hard thing to get out of an economy. It's hard to keep it out once you have it out. And the Fed basically said that although they're not going to raise rates this time, the one thing they do not want to do is get ensnarled in next year's political cycle. The Fed tries to stay clear of causing damage on either side of the pendulum. So they're going to do it this year. But as you just commented, when you hear about what you just talked about with gas prices, you talk about rising taxes, there's going to be a lot of serious headwinds next year that, although they might not get caught up in the inflation data, still makes the cost of living very, very high, especially for people who live in California.
So this is the second pause we've seen this year. Why not just go ahead and raise rates and try to wring out inflation here at this point?
Well, they are concerned. I mean, everybody goes back and marvels about Paul Volcker and what he did. It was a very brave thing he did in the late 70s when he basically said, I'll raise rates forever, but we're going to get inflation out of the system. For those of us that were either alive then or have studied it well, there was an awful lot of political tension on doing it, and it caused a lot of damage. But the same variables are in place. You talk about, in our economic growth running at 1.5% to 2%. Inflation's running at 4 to, let's be honest here, 4 to 5. That means that we have negative real growth, and they're forecasting it will stay that way for the period of time. It is better known as stagflation. What it does mean is it causes massive dislocations in the economy, at least for the foreseeable future. And Frank, common sense dictates an awful lot, and I would encourage the audience to ask this simple question as we go into an election year. I just came back from Las Vegas for 5 days. I did not see premium gas above $4.80 a gallon right off the freeway. This state has no refineries. It doesn't have ships right off the coast. But why are people in California paying so much more for gas when I'll also add, and have bad roads? Vegas has fantastic roads. So we need to, as citizens, to start asking questions about how our money's being used. And when you tell me that the state Senate just imposed a new rule that can raise taxes easily but cannot remove them easily, that tells you all you need to know about where things are going. Let me throw one other thing out there. When you have rising interest rates, there's a lot of debt coming due over the next, let's say, 18 to 24 months. Much of it is public debt. I'm talking about local, whether it's city, county, state, all that debt has to be refinanced. I believe the people in Sacramento are really facing some tough decisions, and I dare say they have no choice but to raise taxes to cover their obligations that they've made to everybody.
On the air live with Ken Winans. In the meantime, we are seeing mortgage rates hit 22-year highs. The Fed funds rate, by the way, at 22-year high. The Fed held the line on that today. The yield on the 10-year note is all the way up to 4.41%, which impacts the fixed rate mortgage rates out there, Ken. And looks like mortgage rates continue to rise here, and real estate certainly seeing coming under pressure given that fact alone, although surprisingly home prices seem to be holding up pretty well here at the moment. You have your own real estate index, so give us your assessment of what's happening on residential as well as commercial real estate, which is another elephant in the room.
Oh, it absolutely is. Let me start with commercial first. Okay, now the other variable, and we have to go back and remember the giant canary in the coal mine we had earlier this year when you had two fairly well-known California banks run into serious trouble and eventually fail. I believe that banks are scared right now, whether or not, it's kind of funny. You go back to the late 70s when they were talking about mortgage rates at these sky-high levels. People back then didn't complain because if you were lucky enough to get a mortgage, you were actually doing quite well. I think the same thing can be said right now. People who can qualify are not complaining, but the problem is the availability of credit. And whether it's at business lines, and you talk about commercial shopping centers, I mean, banks are very concerned right now. They've got a lot of loans out on all these various types of commercial real estate and don't see any definitive way out of this mess. Then you back into the housing market. One thing that's caught my eye very cautiously is that the home building stocks, generally speaking, have really taken a hit over the last month or so. And I think it's because they're finding there is slowing inventory. But the builders themselves actually have financing companies, and they're willing to basically lend money to home buyers that can afford it. But again, the whole thing is dislocated, Frank, and it's going to take some time for it to get back in place. But I've given you all the bad news. Let's talk about some good news. The good news is that we're in that cycle of the year where really from October all the way to next May, seasonally speaking and historically, the stock market does very well. Now, no surprise, September is going to end negative. That's historically the worst month of the year. But I would tell everybody, in wake of all the bad news, start putting your list together of what you want to buy, because even in bad years, markets tend to go up. The bad news has been baked into the cake. Now it's time to look ahead.
On there live with Ken Winans, and if history can be any guide, refresh your memory what happened back in the days when we saw this kind of inflation back, as you mentioned, late 70s, early 80s. I do remember that home prices started to rise as interest rates were rising back then, and then suddenly we saw interest rates pull back and home prices actually pulled back by the mid-'80s, as I recall. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what do you think is going to happen? How is this going to play out?
Well, the big trigger, and actually it's the number one trigger I think that is going to be the debate during the election cycle, is going to be taxation. If there is any talk about...
Afford Anything talks about how to avoid common pitfalls, how to refine your mental models, and how to think about how to think.
In the world of money and investing, it can be easy to be dogmatic about your beliefs. You're part of the FIRE movement, Financial Independence Retire Early, or you hate it, you hate it, you hate it. And either you embrace credit cards as a route to getting airline reward, or you follow the Dave Ramsey camp and believe that you shouldn't touch them because if you play with snakes, you might get bit. Afford Anything, wherever you listen.
Southern Company is making energy smart and sustainable for their 9 million customers across the country. From modernizing infrastructure to achieving their interim carbon reduction goal 10 years early, Southern Company is committed to building a clean, resilient energy future. Learn more at southerncompany.com/future. Southern Company, building the future of energy.
Lowering taxes or trying to become more business friendly, that could be a huge trigger for a rally, because the stock market took off March of 1982 when inflation was still radically out of control. The reason it took off is because taxpayers did see that they were going to get some reprieve. Back then it was the Reagan Revolution, as we call it, but it was a massive restructuring of the whole tax code. In my opinion, the government has forgotten those lessons. They're continuing on the idea of raising taxes and wondering why, especially in the case of California, why people continue to leave and not really asking why. We need to reverse that way of thinking and try to get back to being business friendly or business neutral, at least. We have that ways to go. But Frank, here's the thing. Let me go back real quick to inflation. You look at these national statistics. Again, you've got to think of it regionally. Different parts of the country have higher levels of inflation than others. And I would dare say that the blue states, and in fact, I'd love to have you ask your tax experts that are coming on later tonight, places with higher taxation typically have higher inflation. And I think that's going to be the case here. California will probably be running hotter than the rest of the country for some period of time. That just simply means that we have an opportunity next year to voice our opinions and to try to make changes at the voter level if you choose to do so.
On there live with Ken Winans, and you're absolutely right as far as California policies are concerned. We were talking about the oil industry folks this week, and it is to be noted that L.A. drivers are paying more than $1 a gallon right now for gas than what they're paying in Hawaii in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
Amazing. Well, the bigger issue, and I've raised this issue, again, I try to be an issue-driven kind of person, but I ask the same thing of people who swing on both sides of the aisle. It's not the level of taxation. It's, do you get what you're paying for? And when you hear about the problems with our schools and our roads and everything else included, clearly Californians should be asking the question, where is the money going? Because we have the highest state income tax in the land. What I can tell you as a business owner, it's certainly not going to help any business people move forward, at least not on a broad-based scale. And as I go to Vegas and I go to Salt Lake City and I go to Arizona, I hear the same thing over and over again. I run into people who say they used to live in California, and you ask them why they left. They left because they couldn't afford to live here anymore. I think that trend is going to continue, and hopefully at some point in time, the local officials will realize we need to rethink how we're doing things. We need to keep our taxpayers in the state. What do we need to do? So there's going to be a lot of, Frank, I honestly think next year, as crazy as this year has been, next year with the election cycle could be really interesting, and there could be some massive upsets across the country as people have had enough. And I think especially corporations who have been really feeling the pinch, they're going to begin to ask these questions. Real quick, the strike that's been going on down in Southern California, the strike that is now happening with the automotive industry. These are signs that people are clearly upset with what's happening. The politicians are paying note to this, and I believe there will be messages sent that make people rethink things.
And hopefully the electorate's paying attention as well. The pendulum swings both ways, so you're absolutely right about that. At this point, Ken Winans, where are you putting money now and or taking it off the table?
Well, one of the things that a professional investor knows to do is to tune out and just look at the facts. There's actually a lot of companies that are doing very well right now, and I love I love this kind of the year when you've had a pullback off to the highs. I've got the seasonality in my favor, and I'm looking very hard, and I'm finding some really fun names of individual companies to buy. I would encourage everybody to look at the non-famous tech stocks, and I'm going to throw some names here. Frank, have you ever heard of a company called CGI Group, symbol GIB? Tech stock, most people never heard of it. How about Fair Isaac, FICO? I'm going to throw in Thomson Reuters as a database company, or Cadence Design. My point is this. Don't look at the popular names. Find those companies that are really doing well, but most people have never even heard of before. That is what you should be looking for. I'm also finding, surprisingly, even in retail, as much as we've talked about the problems with retail, take a good look at TJ Maxx, Copart, which is actually an automotive play based on what's happening, certainly in Detroit, but I look at that. O'Reilly Automotive, I've been talking about that a lot during the year. But as I go down the list, the only thing I'm beginning to turn back on, I've done very well with commodities this year, and there was one commodity fund I mentioned earlier in the year that was tied to sugar. For some strange reason, and we can go back and look, sugar, by the way, Frank, forget crypto, look at sugar. It is up 58% on the year. I would suggest people begin to take some of their commodity trades off it, cash in some of the profits, because I think they probably played the cyclical norms. But again, reposition your portfolios as you go forward. Last point. Even in bad years, and I'm taking my data back to 1970, October, November, December, on average, they're up between 2 and 3% per month, even in awful years. Go back and remember 2008. November, December were positive years for that market. So I would encourage people to forget the bad news. If you have money sitting around on the sideline, look for some bargains and pick them up.
Put some sugar on it, right? Pour some sugar on me on that portfolio. That's always good advice.
Absolutely.
And now, what about the IPOs we've seen lately? ARM and then Instacart IPO, and this other one, Klaviyo, right? Any thoughts about these IPOs that have been making news this past week?
Well, it's actually positive when you see companies going public in the wake of what we've been talking about. A lot of very mixed news. I see that as a positive sign. That shows that there is some confidence that we will move forward in the economy. But with that being said, there's a lot of certainly people have been talking about that. It has been a tough market to get in voter or shareholder enthusiasm for. So again, you look at how these IPOs play out and see if they're worth going after. Now, I personally am not a big IPO fan because I'd rather wait and see what happens after normal economics play its tune. But Frank, with that being said, a lot of people, the number one thing, if anybody in your show is listening to it, I'm still astounded how many people have money sitting around in cash earning no interest. Bank accounts, investment accounts, people need to, it's fine to say, hey, I'm saving cash because I'm scared. That's fine. But make sure you're at least collecting a reasonably decent level of interest. I looked at one account today. It is collecting a whopping 0.19% interest on a credit union account. I will not mention the institution. But this is a telltale sign. People need to pay attention. And the inflation world is here to stay. Make sure you're at least making money to keep even.
Ken Winans, President, Winans Investments at WinAnsInvestments.com, Forbes Magazine contributor, market historian, author of Investment Atlas 1 and 2, and great guy, great contributor here for decades here. Ken, thank you very much for joining us live here tonight. Folks, I'm not exaggerating when I say this. QC Kinetics can change your life. You can live again without that chronic joint pain and without drugs or surgery. Frank Mottek here. QC Kinetics is advanced regenerative medicine. They take your body's own concentrated healing properties and put them right into your joint to restore and repair that damaged tissue that's causing all of that horrible pain. The patient satisfaction reports are absolutely astonishing. Finally, a real alternative to the old ways of dealing with pain. And unlike surgery, there is no downtime with QC treatments. Now, if you have constant pain in your knees, hips, shoulders, or back, you need to call and get a free consultation from the medical professionals at QC Kinetics today. Imagine this autumn moving around pain-free, doing the things you love again, walking, hiking, playing with your grandkids, you name it. Call QC Kinetics and see how the latest advances in precision regenerative medicine can attack your pain and bring you lasting relief. Call QC Kinetics, locations in Glendale, the city of Orange, Mission Viejo, and now also in Costa Mesa. Call 213-997-PAIN, 213-997-PAIN. Again, that's 213-997-PAIN. Mottek on Money continues here in 790 KBC. We're going to dust off that Toto tune, Hold the Line. That's what the Fed did today, holding the line on short-term interest rates, leaving them unchanged for the moment, but signaling more rate hikes might be ahead. In fact, a clear message that interest rate hikes are expected to be higher for longer by cutting their forecast for rate cuts in 2024 from 4 to 2. Fed also predicting the economy will slow from an estimated 2.1% growth rate this year to 1.5% next year, and then hopefully speed up again. The Dow coming in for a closing loss of 77 points to 34,441. The S&P 500 down 42 at 4402, and the NASDAQ down 209 points at 13,469. The yield in the 10-year note now 4.41%, 16-year high for those benchmark bond yields. 22-year highs for the Fed funds rate, which they held steady today. Mortgage rates, meanwhile, hovering at or near 22-year highs. Price of oil getting lots of attention lately, still above $90 a barrel in New York after slipping nearly $1 today to $90.28 a barrel. In London, Brent crude down 81 cents at $93.54 a barrel. That's the international benchmark. The damage has been done at Southern California gas pumps, where you're seeing regular gas averaging $6.07 a gallon now. That's 73 cents a gallon higher than what you were paying a month ago, $6.37. The average price for premium diesel now at $6.48 a gallon. That's also nearly 70 cents a gallon higher than what truckers were paying a month ago. Checking the cryptos now, we see a Bitcoin of about $50 at $27,120. Ethereum down $1 to $1,623, and Doge at 6 cents. Instacart shares closing down nearly 11% today following yesterday's IPO, in which they finished up 12%. General Mills shares mostly flat after that consumer foods company reported first quarter results that topped analysts' expectations. Pinterest, the social media site, rising 3.1% after executives of the company forecast accelerated revenue growth following a slowdown dating to 2022. Friends, I'm not exaggerating when I say this. QC Kinetics can change your life. You can live again without that chronic joint pain and without drugs or surgery. Frank Mottek here. QC Kinetics is advanced regenerative medicine. They take your body's own concentrated healing properties and put them right into your joint to restore and repair that damaged tissue that's causing all of that horrible pain. Now, the patient satisfaction reports are astonishing. Finally, a real alternative to the old ways of dealing with pain. Unlike surgery, no downtime with QC treatments. If you have constant pain in your knees, hips, shoulders, or back, you need to call and get a free consultation from the medical professionals at QC Kinetics today. Imagine this fall moving around pain-free, doing the things you love again, walking, hiking, playing with your grandkids, you name it. Call QC Kinetics and see how the latest advances in precision regenerative medicine can attack your pain and bring you lasting relief. QC Kinetics, locations in Glendale, the city of Orange, Mission Viejo, and now also in Costa Mesa. The number to call is 213-997-PAIN, 213-997-PAIN. Again, that's 213-997-PAIN. Mottek on Money continues here on 790 KABC. Well, they did it again. The California Senate passing new legislation to make it easier to impose taxes and harder to repeal them. Yep, a couple of bills. This comes probably as no surprise to you that the state Senate passing yet another set of bills today, ACA 1 and ACA 13, both of which will make it harder to live here in the Golden State. Let's bring in Susan SHELLY now, columnist for the Southern California News Group and host of the Howard Jarvis radio show, heard Monday nights right here on 790.
It's time for kickoff, and the Believe podcast will get you ready for the new season.
If you don't dominate in the running game, you won't win this football game.
Believe has podcasts covering all 32 professional teams and many of your favorite college teams, too.
He was always kind of one step ahead of everybody.
Sideline to sideline, end zone to end zone.
He's been such a part of the fabric of this team, so closely associated with the city, with championship-level football.
Search BLEAV podcasts wherever you listen.
KBC, and thanks for making a special appearance here this evening, Susan, on this big story, and thank you for being such a great watchdog for taxpayers. And tell us what just happened in Sacramento.
Well, thank you, Frank. What they just did is they passed two bills which will go straight to the ballot, and both of these would make it easier to raise taxes. They're just trying to make it easier to raise your local taxes because all of the cities have these pension obligations, these deeply unfunded pensions, and it's just eating the whole budget. And so they want to come to the taxpayers over and over again for tax increases. And of course, they always save the most important things to ask you to raise taxes. So it's always going to be for the fire department, police, 911, ambulances. It's always going to be that because they've spent all the money you already pay on things you would never agree to raise taxes to pay for. So that's the game. And what they've done is pass ACA 1, which is a direct attack on Proposition 13. Proposition 13 says a two-thirds vote. When they put a special tax on the ballot, it must get a two-thirds vote. And this would drop it to 55%. So many more of these would pass. And that means that your taxes are going to go up after every election. And it could be sales taxes, property taxes, it could be utility taxes, it could be bonds, it could be anything, as long as they can call it infrastructure or something related to housing. Those are the categories. Even transit bailouts would pass with 55% instead of two-thirds. So it's very, very dangerous. And fortunately, it will be on the ballot probably next November, and we will be able to campaign hard against it and educate the voters about how it just raises the cost of living in California. As you said, it just makes it harder and harder to live here.
Now, these are going to be marketed as Save the Butterfly. We've been deceived before, right? And what are they going to try to do this time around?
That's what they're going to call it. They're going to call it Save the Puppies, and people are going to say, oh, well, we want to save the puppies. But we have to educate the voters that they have taxpayer protections right now in the Constitution from Prop 13. And ACA 1, which was the name of this bill when it was in the legislature, it'll have a different number on the ballot. This is a direct attack on your taxpayer protections. This makes it easier to raise your taxes. And the other thing that they passed is ACA 13. This makes it harder to do anything about it. What they did is they created this poison pill that stops initiatives that protect taxpayers. It's pretty diabolical. They're trying to say that a constitutional amendment that protects taxpayers has to pass not with the simple majority that constitutional amendments have always passed with since the gold rush, not the simple majority. If it protects taxpayers, it's going to need a two-thirds vote to pass. That's ACA 13. So we're going to be campaigning against that also.
All right. Hopefully the one called Save the Kittens. That would be a tough one to defeat. But you're terrific at boiling this down and have the patience for this. This whole proposition system is very, very confusing, especially for people not from the state or not used to this and having to make these decisions usually right there on the spot in the ballot box there. People don't take the time, unfortunately, to study these things. But obviously, you're getting a running start here, making us aware of these two very, very important measures here that will impact people's taxes here again in California.
Yes, well, everyone can go to the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association website at hjta.org, sign up for the email alerts, and HJTA will send you an explanation of what's on the ballot so that it's translated into English so you can understand which ones are tax increases and which ones are not. Most of them will be tax increases, so it's pretty easy to figure out. But there will be a couple of good things that you'll want to pass, and we will help you figure out which are which.
And, of course, people are still fuming over the deception involved in that so-called death tax proposition that did pass, also under deceptive circumstances, right? And you're looking to repeal that. Maybe you can give us an update on what people need to know about that one.
Well, that's going very well. We have a one-page official petition which you can download in your house and print on your own printer. Any printer, regular letter-size paper, one page. And when you download it and print it, you just sign it. The complete instructions are included in the file. You just sign it and you send it back to the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. You can go to repealthedeathtax.com, repealthedeathtax.com. Send that link to everyone you know. Everyone can download and print this petition instantly and send it in. And if we get 1 million signatures by the middle of January, this will be on next November's ballot.
And that's the one that was sold as helping fire victims and so forth, right? Exactly. And it turned out to be a disaster and has created a lot of heartbreaking horror stories. Maybe you can share some of those stories with us now.
It's terrible because what it has done is it took away the parent-child transfer exclusion from reassessment. It used to be for 30-some years that you had the constitutional right to pass your home of any value plus up to $1 million of assessed value of other property, like a small business or a small apartment building or a vacation cabin or a duplex. Those would be other property. You could pass that to your kids without any change to the tax bill. And now that constitutional right is gone. And so what's happening, if a small apartment building, for instance, which is owned by a mom and pop landlord, if they pass away and their kids inherit the building, it is reassessed to current market value. Well, an apartment building from the 1970s and 1980s, that is going to be an unaffordable tax increase because those units are under rent control. So what's going to happen is the tenants will be evicted. The units will be withdrawn from the market. The building will be demolished. There's no other alternative. No one can make that business work once those taxes go to market value. And this is horrible. And a lot of families who have rented at below market rates to family members or were counting on that revenue to pay someone's medical bills or to pay for someone's care, they're losing everything. And what's really heartbreaking is that so many communities are just starting to build generational wealth. They're just starting. 1 generation, 2 generations of property ownership. And now, when the kids inherit those homes, reassessed to market value. Even if you move into it, you could still get a tax increase because there's a cap on the value that's protected. So you could still get a huge unaffordable tax increase and be forced to sell. And for the period of time between when you settle the estate, list it, and close escrow, you owe those higher taxes, even if you're trying to sell it. So it's just brutal on people at the worst possible time. And as you said, it was slipped through while there were, I think, $50 million worth of commercials about how this was going to help wildfire victims. And it did, and that's fine, and nobody's changing that. But we are going to repeal this horrible tax increase and restore the right, retroactively, by the way, restore the right of parents to pass property to their children without a tax increase.
Website address one more time, please.
repealthedeathtax.com.
Terrific, Susan. Thank you very much for taking that important call this evening. Susan Shelley, columnist for the Southern California News Group and host of the Howard Jarvis radio show, heard Monday nights here on 790 KBC. Susan, again, thank you very much for joining us live here tonight.
Thank you, Frank.
Folks, let's be honest. Sometimes we find ourselves or a loved one dealing with a massive injury caused by a terrible accident by no fault of our own. Sometimes it's simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. We're good at preparing for earthquakes and fires, but let's not forget to prepare in case we're involved in a major accident. Critical to know who to call first. Clark Fielding became a lawyer to help you in a crisis. Fielding Law is focused on justice and resources for you because they understand how the system works and what to do in the most horrific situations. I always say to put the Fielding Law team in your phone under the word accident, so all you have to do is hit the press dial number, hit that button. Believe me, you'll feel better having set this up in advance for yourself and your family. The number is 833-88-SHARK. Again, that's 833-88-SHARK. With the population exploding and increased vehicles on the freeways these days, be proactive, prepare for the worst, and expect the best. But if and when you need help, call Clark Fielding and his team of sharks at 833-88-SHARK. 833-88-SHARK, or go to clarkthesharklaw.com. Again, that's clarkthesharklaw.com. Mottek on Money continues here in 790 KBC. Can you believe it? Los Angeles getting national attention again, this time for a new L.A. homeless measure, which the L.A. City Council has approved, putting on the ballot early next year, which, if approved, replace homeless people in hotel rooms next to paying guests. How'd you like to check into a top hotel with your family and find out the place is accommodating the homeless? Let's bring in Chip Rogers now, the president of the American Hotel and Lodging Association, on Twitter at Chip AHLA. Chip Rogers, thank you very much for coming to the line, and thanks for your Twitter support this evening as well. Take it from the top and go ahead and lay it on thick for you. Give us your reaction to what's being proposed here in Los Angeles.
Well, one of the worst ideas we've ever seen. In fact, no other city has ever done anything like this. It is a ballot measure, so the good voters of Los Angeles can hopefully do the right thing and reject this. But this idea of taking people who need help, the homeless population, who seriously need help, and putting them in hotels alongside of paying guests, right in the room next to you, in the lobby, in the swimming pool, in the restaurant, when they need medical attention. It is a dangerous idea. It's a dumb idea. And it's shocking to me that the local union that is pushing this is willing to put their own members in physical danger for this crazy idea.
And as I understand it, the idea is to force hotels to report how many unused rooms they have on a given day and then accommodate the homeless, right?
So, yeah, it's about as ridiculous as you just laid out. At 2 o'clock every day, every hotel in the city of Los Angeles would be required to call City Hall. Now, imagine calling City Hall and then trying to get a good answer. But that's what they're suggesting is at 2 o'clock, you call City Hall, you tell them how many rooms that you have open. And by the way, check-in at most hotels is after 2 o'clock, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense logistically. And you also need to inform the city of what rate you're charging that night. The city will then issue vouchers to people that are experiencing homelessness, and those people will take the vouchers and go to the hotels and check in just as if they're a regular paying guest.
So is this all about money as far as the union is concerned? Obviously, the city would be paying for these rooms, and the folks working at these hotels would have more work. Is that the idea, I guess?
Well, that's a theory. That's what they're suggesting, but there's no way it's going to play out that way because think about this. Look, staying at a hotel is a choice. And if you are a consumer and you're booking a hotel, are you going to book a hotel in the city of Los Angeles with your family, understanding that in the room on either side of you might be someone who needs medical attention, might be someone with a chemical dependency? You're just not going to do that. So what's going to happen in short order is people are just going to not come to Los Angeles. They may not come to California at all. And so the economic damage is significant. But if, in fact, this goes through, the first people we worry about are the workers in the hotel room because they're not equipped or trained to do any of this. It's just a terrible, terrible idea.
It should be noted, Los Angeles is the second largest city in the United States, and obviously you're the president of the American Hotel and Lodging Association, so this is finally getting national attention, this thing that's going to be on the ballot in March of next year.
Yeah, it gets national attention because we can't imagine a world in which this spreads outside of Los Angeles, but it could potentially happen. As I mentioned a moment ago, and I think everyone understands it, homelessness is a serious problem. Cities all across the country are grappling with this. If this passes in Los Angeles, the politicians are going to stand up and declare victory, whether it works or not. Now, we know it's not going to work, but what we don't want to happen is copycat legislation passing in other left-leaning cities like Seattle or Chicago or New York. This just could be devastating to the hotel, the travel, and tourism industry.
We have seen situations where cities have actually outright bought hotels, including here in L.A., right? Are there any other examples of what you've seen across the country where hotels are being used in some fashion to accommodate the homeless?
You know, I'm glad you point that out because that's a major distinction. Purchasing a hotel or in some places leasing the entire hotel and turning it into a homeless shelter and bringing in medical personnel and experts to deal with that population, that has been happening, and that's fine. That's okay. But taking a hotel and mixing the regular paying guest, the mom and dad with their kids on vacation, with the homeless person right next door to them, that is a dangerous situation because the people there are not trained to deal with that population. Someone who's homeless needs help. I mean, you saw the Stanford study that showed that more than a quarter of them have a chemical dependency, have some sort of criminal background record, and that's not who paying guests need to be next to. So it's just a terrible, terrible idea, and hopefully we'll do everything we can to stop it.
And you probably heard we have this hot labor summer here. It's soon to be a hot labor autumn here in Los Angeles with the hotel workers going on strike at various properties. How do you expect that situation to play out here?
I'm not sure because, these labor negotiations took place in a number of other major cities across the country, and all the other cities came to an agreement. Los Angeles is the only major city where there is no agreement. I was in Anaheim last week, in fact, and was at a hotel where the strikers were outside at 5 o'clock with the bullhorns and making as much noise as they could to wake up all the guests. It's unfortunate. That's not the way that someone should negotiate, but that's what's happening. And the leadership there of the local union seems dead set on really playing this out to the very end. I'm not sure what the end goal is, but putting homeless in the hotels certainly doesn't help the situation.
Certainly. And of course, tourism is such a big part of this economy and of the nation's economy. How is the hotel business doing these days?
Right now, pretty good. I mean, if you look at where we were in 2019, we're going to end up probably about the same place in 2023. Now, the mix is a little bit different, less business travel, less meetings and events, but more leisure travel. And so you're still seeing people take those vacations, getting out and traveling. You're seeing a lot of what we call leisure travel, which is the mixture of business and leisure because people can work from their hotel room. But numerically, if you look at occupancy and you look at the revenue that's being generated, when you adjust it for inflation, it's almost where we were in 2019.
Chip Rogers, thank you very much for taking the call. Look forward to staying in touch with you on all these big issues. Thank you very much for joining us live here this evening. That's Chip Rogers, president of the American Hotel and Lodging Association. Live with us here tonight on Mottek on Money on 790 KBC. The Fed holds the line on short-term interest rates. Stocks pulled back. The Dow down 77, the S&P 500 down 42, NASDAQ down 209. This is Mottek on Money on 790 KBC.
At OXO, there's a recipe for innovation. We create products that put a new spin on form and function. Add a small measure of convenience, a peel of comfort, and just a pop of freshness. Because no matter what you're making, we want to make it better. OXO. Better. Guaranteed.